This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And welcome in, folks, to the 101st edition of Open Mic Night. I am your host, Noah Taluki, and on today's episode, I recap my last couple weeks at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, a little bit of enshrinement as well coming up next week, also the Pro Football Hall of Fame game, but I'm going to keep it a little short because we have an interview today with Chris Willis. He is the lead archivist for NFL Films in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. His big project that he's working on right now is Hard Knocks with the Detroit Lions. We're going to talk about Hard Knocks. We're going to talk about his relationship that he built over time with the late, great Steve Sabol at NFL Films. And also, he's written 8 books about the history of pro football, including one of them about Dutch Clark, the first Lions superstar of the 1930s. His number 7 was the first Lions number retired in team history. So we're going to talk about all 3 of those. And it was a really, really good conversation with him. And he's a guy that I met a couple weeks ago at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, doing research for another book that he's writing. And he was incredible. And the minute I met him, I said, he's definitely got to be on this podcast. So really, really happy that I was able to get him on. And it should be a really good interview a little bit later on as well. So hopefully everybody had a great week. I know we took a little bit of a hiatus. Got a little busy over here in Canton. Just a lot of things going on, a lot of research that I've been doing for John Carroll as well for our 100th football season. So a lot of that stuff just kind of got in the way. But 2 weeks ago, we had Matt Derry on for the 100th episode. I believe this is the 4th time that he's been on, a true mentor for me, and a guy I've really looked up to since high school. And he was my teacher, senior journalism teacher at U of D High on the northwest side of Detroit. And, he's really a guy that I text a lot still and really helped fine-tune a lot of things for me in high school before I got to college and my experiences at John Carroll and all that. So I'm always going to be indebted to him. And he's welcome on this podcast anytime. And I told him that. I said, anytime you want to come on or, anytime you talk about Lions and all that, it was great. And who better than to celebrate the 100th episode 2 weeks ago than with Matt Derry. So couldn't think of anyone better. That's for sure. So last couple weeks at the Hall of Fame have been pretty good. I've been meeting a lot of great people, doing more research on some of the fellow inductees for 2022. Cutting up more media guides that we're going to scan into PDFs. So old media guides from teams, so people can look up old players and all that from, if people are doing research for that. Also got to meet a couple of marquee guys. One of them, Kirk Cousins, quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, Michigan State quarterback as well. He stopped by the Hall of Fame a couple of weeks ago to tour, and he was really, really awesome. And sporting a Saugatuck hat. Shout out to anyone from the west side of the state there near his hometown of Holland. But he was really, really nice, very genuine. Talked a little bit with him a little bit about his Michigan State days as well. So reliving the Wisconsin Hail Mary. I'll never forget that one. That's what kind of made me fall in love with Michigan State football a little bit was that Hail Mary in 2011 that he threw to Keith Nickel, former college quarterback as well. A couple other guys, Isaac Bruce and Donnie Shell, 2 Hall of Famers that I was able to meet. They were here for the Stark County Football All-Star Game. They were honorary coaches. One was for the East and the other was for the West. And they had a lot of great stories to share as well. Isaac Bruce, of course, the longtime Rams receiver, part of the Greatest Show on Turf with Kurt Warner during, that 1999 season with Dick Vermeil and company. So a tremendous, tremendous receiver. And then, of course, Donnie Shell, the longtime Steelers safety, I believe from 1974 to 1987, was on the vaunted Steel Curtain defense. And later on in the 80s, with Chuck Noll as well. So a lot of great stories there. Was able to meet them and share in that. And it's always cool when you meet guys like that and just the stories that they have and the experiences. It's invaluable. It's priceless. So being able to share in that was really cool as well. Also got to meet Tom McDaniels, the father of Josh McDaniels. Josh was actually getting inducted into the Stark County Football Hall of Fame. And his dad is a legendary coach in Northeast Ohio. He coached Maurice Clarett in high school, if that name rings a bell. He was featured on that 30 for 30 documentary called Youngstown Boys. That was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. He's the first, one of the first true freshmen to start at running back for Ohio State. And of course, he coached Josh and his brother Ben at McKinley High School, one of the most storied programs in Ohio high school football history. So that was really, really cool to meet him. And I know, Josh and his dad are really big supporters of John Carroll because, of course, Josh McDaniels, a John Carroll grad. They'll be here in a couple weeks for the Hall of Fame game, Raiders versus the Jaguars, to kick off the 2022 NFL season. And also getting to know a little bit Joe Horrigan, George Veras, two great guys at the Hall of Fame as well. A lot of great stories there. Joe Horrigan has been at the Hall of Fame for over 40 years. He's a guy that you see a lot on NFL films. He wrote a book about the 100th anniversary of the NFL. And George Veras, a guy who's an executive at the Hall of Fame, who he did a lot of producing over the years, has won multiple Emmys, and he produced the CBS NFL Today on CBS, NBA in the 80s with Magic and Bird. He's got a lot of great stories. Good friends with Joe Namath as well. So hoping one day I'll get those two guys on the podcast, as well as, of course, John Kendall, the wonderful archivist at the Hall of Fame as well. So it's been really good. It's sad that it's only a couple more weeks left, but cherishing every day for sure. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience in Canton. And I urge anyone listening to this podcast that has not been out to Canton yet, please come and visit. If you are a football fan that knows a lot about the history of the game and really has a true admiration for it, I really think this is the place for you. There's so many wonderful exhibits. And I know the theater just got the new Super Bowl film over there as well. So if you're ever making it down to Canton, I would definitely advise. And there's still tickets available if anyone wants to come to the enshrinement. I know last year Calvin Johnson got inducted. There's no Lions this year, but if there's anyone interested, just in football history, it's a wonderful, wonderful event for that. That's for sure. Also watched a little bit of the All-Star game 2 weeks ago in the Home Run Derby. Won't get into that too much, but Miguel Cabrera, of course, and Gregory Soto were the two All-Stars for the Tigers. Miguel Cabrera was kind of like an honorary All-Star, technically made his 12th appearance, but really was just a senior member, just kind of like what Albert Pujols was in his last season. So I always love watching the Home Run Derby. I thought Pete Alonso would go for the three-peat, but unfortunately Juan Soto beat him out. But I always enjoy watching that. I didn't really watch as much of the All-Star game, but the Home Run Derby was fun. And that ball flew in LA. That California, sunshine, that California air, that ball flies out there. And so, a lot of those home runs hit in the Derby and all that too was picturesque in LA with the palm trees and all that in the background. We got to get a All-Star game in Detroit again. I don't know. Maybe the park's just too big. Maybe that's why people are against it. But 2005, that was the last time they had the All-Star game. So hopefully one day it'll come back to Detroit. All right. I don't want to talk for too long because we have a great interview with Chris Willis, the lead archivist for NFL Films right now. And joining us now here on the Open Mic Night podcast is Chris Willis. He's an archivist at NFL Films in New Jersey. He's also written 8 books about pro football history, and he's won 4 Emmys for his production work with NFL Films as well, including 2 for Hard Knocks that the Detroit Lions will be on coming up in training camp. Chris, thank you so much for joining us here.
Oh, no, thanks for having me, Noah. Appreciate it.
So before we start talking about more of your book about Dutch Clark and Steve Sabol and Hard Knocks and all that, what exactly do you do at NFL Films as an archivist?
Yeah, I was hired in 1996, which is now almost 27 years. And my main role is to help the producers get the research that they need for our specific projects. So we have what used to be a tape library, and then also a print library. So any sort of research, that is needed for any project, I'm sort of the guy they come to. Whether it's they want research on how to write their questions for an interview, or we're doing a football life, that airs on NFL Network. They want to do research on a guy, or whether trying to find footage or this specific shot, of somebody. So for the most part, I check scripts and things like that. So for the most part, anything to do with the research, I'm sort of our department is sort of the place they go to find anything that they can find that help our shows be better.
How'd you want to get into this? Because it's a very unique field. I feel like not a lot of people do things like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fortunate thing for me is, one, I had a passion for football, so, growing up in Central Ohio and going to high state games. And my dad was a used book dealer too. So I grew up reading a lot. So I love the history, how the game got started and the players and the games and the teams. So when I was a physical education major in college, but I saw that sports history was a graduate program at Ohio State, so once I was done, I applied there and got there, just to maybe be, a teacher, professor, or like your relationship with the Pro Football Hall of Fame, maybe work somewhere there. And, along my studies there, I was able to do an internship here at NFL Films. So after the season, they sort of hired me full time, which is what I wanted to do. But so, yeah, I don't think sports history is in a lot of, graduate programs, but that's the impetus to where it got me to NFL Films was through a sports history program.
And speaking of sports history, as I mentioned before, you've written 8 books on the history of pro football, one on Red Grange, one on the Oorang Indians from the early 1900s, early pro football in Ohio, 1984 49ers, Joe Carr, the old NFL commissioner, Columbus Panhandle is one of the early teams, and one that you just wrote, Bronco Nagurski. That's your latest book coming out in a little bit. But the one about one of the star Lions players, really the original star of the Lions, Dutch Clark in the 1930s. He was actually on the NFL 100 team just a few years ago. A guy that a lot of Lions fans, I think, really forget about. Of course, his number is retired by the Lions, number 7. That's the reason why Matthew Stafford couldn't wear number 7 out of college because it was retired by the Lions. But, for a guy like Dutch Clark, who has been kind of forgotten about by some, especially Lions fans, what made you want to write this book about him?
Yeah, I mean, it was he really wasn't on my radar for a while to write about, but I had heard of the name, obviously, doing research, but he was, like you mentioned, he was more of a behind the radar type of guy. Below, he wasn't at the top of everybody's list of maybe the greatest of all time. Although he was a charter member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, when the doors opened, he was one of the first 17 charter members. So, but the more I sort of looked into his career, we had actually, 5 or 6 of his games, from the 30s. So I started watching him play, and the more research I did on him, the more I was impressed about how great of a player he was, in the time that he played. And so, so that got me started on the research part of it. And then when I reached out to the family, he had 2 sons that were living, and 2 stepsons, and they were all really great. They were, they had great stories. They had some scrapbooks. They had a lot of even more information, and they had heard the stories, and they talked a little bit more about him as a man. And so that combination said, you know what, this is a really good story to tell of maybe a great player that, people don't know quite much. Not just Lions fans. I just think in general, if you're NFL fans or you understand, the history or like the Hall of Fame, like I think he was, as good as a player in his era as anybody, and I was so happy that when in 2019, when the 100th team was done, that, the voters and the blue panel took a look at him and they understood that he stood out. Like he was one of those two-way players that stood out above, pretty much everybody. Within my research, I'll give one point about him that sort of solidified it. The Associated Press, which at that time, in 1940 was like one of the biggest media organizations, and they had a football player of the decade for the 1930s. In the 1920s, it was Red Grange, which was an obvious choice. With the 30s, they voted in 1940, and they awarded it to the Dutch Clark. And you got to think he beat out other players from the 30s, Sammy Baugh, Mel Hine, Don Hudson, Clark Hinkle, like all the greats that you think maybe played in the 30s, or even Bronco Nagurski, like, those are guys that are the best two-way players of all time. Well, Dutch was like a no-brainer, and he was the football man of that decade, so that's why I was like I said, the more I looked into it, I was like, man, this is a project that was worth, delving into for a couple of years to present a story.
And back then in the 1930s, pro football was just such a different game than it is now. Single wing offenses, Red Grange was kind of like a tailback and a quarterback, taking snaps sometimes or getting the handoffs. Very, very different there. And he actually led the Lions to the 1935 NFL championship, their first in their history. People forget about that as well. Mm-hmm. But what was it exactly about Dutch Clark that you found that really made him, stand out in that era of a really rough and tumble era of pro football?
I think you nailed it a little bit there is his versatility, at that time, especially before, the single platoon, like everybody played both ways, they played both offense and defense and you pretty much had to be good on both sides. You just couldn't be, good, an offensive player because you had to go play defense, so I think his versatility stood out, I think more than anything, like he was the best running back in the league, by far. When you watch footage of him, he was always going forward. There's a lot of, like you mentioned, single wing and double wing. And, a lot of the play was at the line of scrimmage. There's not a lot of breakaway, he wasn't as great as Grange, maybe going 80 yards, but he always seemed to be going forward, 5 yards here, 7 yards here, 12 yards here. He, a lot of times guys would just run the line and just hit and get no yards. He was always, using his feet, finding the holes. And then he was also, like I said, probably one of the best defensive backs during that time. And he was maybe the best scorer, especially during the 30, he was a drop kicker, field goals and extra points. He was very good. And at that time, things like field position and scoring were like the two most important things. It really wasn't passing. It wasn't catching as much, it was field position and, can you put some points on the board? And he was able to do that. He played 7 years, I believe. In 3 years, he led the NFL in scoring, and he actually missed a year because he went and coach basketball at his alma mater. It's one of his prime years. He probably would have led and he was all pro, pretty much consensus all pro, first team 6 of the 7 years. And he was just, like I said, a very versatile player that did pretty much everything as well as anybody.
Now, when he first started his career in 1931, they were in Portsmouth, the Lions, in Portsmouth, Ohio, and then they transitioned over to Detroit a few years later. Do you think that he helped establish Detroit as a pro football market in the 1930s, especially when the Detroit Heralds had failed, years earlier, having that star presence, that marquee player? Do you think that really helped, the Lions take off in Detroit?
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned it before. Joe Carr was the president throughout the 20s and 30s. And he always thought Detroit was a good city to have an NFL franchise. And there was 3 or 4 previous teams, but they didn't really last more than 1 or 2 years. For some reason, they just wasn't working in Detroit, until 1934, when the small town Portsmouth Spartans just didn't have enough money to operate a team, in small town Ohio. So their first year in 1934, they really took off because of him. Not only his play on the field, but he was a star attraction, like fans would want to see Dutch Clark. I remember going through the research and the newspaper accounts, and one of the best quotes, and I used it for the book, is, a few sports writers started calling him, he's the Ty Cobb of football in Detroit. And if you were going to put, Ty Cobb was the man for the Detroit Tigers, for decades. And to compare him to Dutch Clark and say he was at that type of level of an athlete, which he was, he was the first superstar. He was the one that the fans kind of knew, knew his face and knew his name. He had a very, sort of regal name to Dutch Clark, and so he was by far the first sort of publicity superstar that the Lions could, hold their hat on and promote and stuff. So, and sort of help establish that sport, in the city of Detroit.
What was the most unique thing that you found about Dutch Clark in your research? Something that popped out and stood out more than anything else?
I would say the first thing, I think it was just a unique thing because I always thought it was unique because there was articles written about it in the newspaper, and it just wasn't. In a couple of years, he actually used to wear gloves while he played. Nobody else was wearing gloves, but there was a couple articles in the Detroit paper. They would, they pointed it out. They actually went to practice, and he's holding the ball, with the glove, and he sort of talks about, when the weather gets a little bit cold, I would like to wear these gloves. And I'm sure they were just like no more than like gardening gloves or work gloves. They weren't like the Tactify things we see today, where it gives you a better grip because the ball is still a little bit bigger, and So I thought that was unique on the field. Like, like I said, I mentioned his running style of always moving forward, with his feet, never seemed to have a lost carry. But just seeing him wear gloves, and you see some of the photos, it just was a little, was for me for that time period, because it's almost like some of the players who weren't wearing helmets at the time, you see a guy playing with no helmet, but to see a guy with gloves, was kind of funny to see. So.
You could say Dutch Clark was ahead of his time a little bit in the 1930s, even with some gardening gloves on, for sure. Well, I want to talk about another Colorado College alum. Of course, Dutch Clark was in Colorado Springs at Colorado College. Another alum that's also in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Your former boss, Steve Sabol at NFL Films. Former president of NFL Films, passed away about 10 years ago. His father, Ed, was the founder as well. I believe you interned under him when you first got to NFL Films. What was your relationship like with Steve?
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about Steve. I was fortunate to work with him for 16 years, and he gave me my first start, in the archives department here. And he was just, he was so genuine, he was so down to earth. He had two passions, and it was football and making movies. So, if you were a football fan, you wanted to make movies, it's a real good fit. And I think the other thing for him, he was accessible. His door was always open. Here's the president, the guy that sort of found, put NFL Films on the map. His door was always open. You could go in there and you could talk football, you could talk movies, you could, just shoot the breeze. And he would stop by the library here, and he would always say, "Hey, do you need anything, Chris?" And he always wanted to make your job easier or give you everything you needed to make your job the best it could be, and that's, as an employee, something that's all you can ask is that, that the head man, he can talk to you and say, "Hey, what can I make your job easier and better?" So like I said, I can't say enough good things about Steve, and he was just a tremendous person to work for and spend that time and the time he was here.
No, NFL Films, they really took football filmmaking to another level. They made it look like Hollywood. A lot of the old NFL films were just very cut and dry, just a few highlights here and there, but they really put the Hollywood and they put the music into it as well. Learning in your experiences with Ed and Steve, over the years before they passed, what was it about them that made them those visionaries that really wanted to take it to the next level in a league that was growing at the time in the late 60s?
Yeah, I think they were you can go back and say, hey, they were the perfect people at the perfect time. Like the game, in the 60s going into it was like reaching its peak. It was about to pass baseball as the most popular sport in the country. And I think the one thing is, and I saw it every day with Steve, especially Steve, is their passion. Like they had a passion for what they were doing. Like they cared about what they were doing. They wanted to do it the best. And that sort of rubbed off on everybody else in the building. So I think like I said, you combine those certain things, being at the right time, the right place, and then you have the passion to do it, and the other thing is, as much as I like writing and I love reading about football, it's definitely a more visual sport, like I said, I hopefully, I find a small audience, for my books and my book projects and to preserve that type of history. But most people love to watch football. They just love to watch. It's a visual sport. And for the Sabols, they took that to, like you said, to a different level. Like, it was just a different way of watching it, because it wasn't live. This is after the fact, to respond the way fans do, for our shows and our documentaries and our highlights, like, the outcome, it's like knowing the end of the movie, but you still get excited about it. You still get emotional about it and stuff like that. So, so that's what made them and the shows sort of at that time. And now, like I said, we continue almost, 50 plus years later, that sort of, tradition of our documentaries and our shows sort of bringing that passion out that they showed for many years.
And the thing with Steve too, you mentioned his passion and all that. I feel like he really had not only just a great understanding of football and movies, but with art as well. He was a real art connoisseur, and I know you've shared some stories with me before when we met about how he had all that artwork in his office and really throughout the the building at NFL Films. So speak on that about his love of art and how that translated to his films that he made.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, like you mentioned, attended college at Colorado College, and he was an art major. So it was in his blood from, I think, an earlier age to be creative, to use art as a way of expressing himself. And he did that throughout his life. I mean, even when he was sick, the last year or so when he was sick, he still tried to do his artwork, and it displayed around the building. He'd actually have art shows around here around Philadelphia and on the East Coast, like in his latter years and stuff. So it was something that was in his blood, I think from an early age. And it's said when you see some of the artworks here, it's just really creative, and some of it might be a little strange, or you got to really think about, okay, what's he trying to show here? He's got Johnny Unitas with Marilyn Monroe, with Van Gogh. Like, okay, what's he really trying to say here? So in a collage of something. So he was definitely, like I said, a different breed of with his creativity.
I wanted to show that passion and the blood on the fingers with Dick Butkus and all that as well, which was unique. We're going to move on now to Hard Knocks, and of course, what everyone wants to look for with the Detroit Lions. You've won 2 Emmys, as I mentioned about it as well. Why the Lions this year? Of course, I know there were some other teams in the mix with it, but why was it Detroit that was ultimately picked for this show?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain rules, like I said, we never want to force a team to do it, that's always not the best start or situation. But the Lions were one of the few teams that showed a little interest of maybe of doing it. So we always like new teams. I mean, we don't mind going back to some of the teams we've done, we have a good relationship, and do those things. But I think it was the opportunity for us to do a new team that hadn't been on Hard Knocks, or All or Nothing, or in-season show that was on Amazon, and now we do an in-season Hard Knocks. But so I think they wanted a little bit more of, hey, exposure, and try to get a little bit of the team exposed out there, in usually a positive light. So I think it was that combination of the team had showed some interest, and we're always, like I said, willing to work with a new team and lead them into, how we do the show.
Is there any stories or anything like that maybe fans should look out for? Anything you can reveal right now?
Yeah, I mean, I know they just got there this week, last couple of days, but I think the one main thing we liked going in, which we might not have done as much, we always usually have maybe the players lead us into coaches. What we saw with this staff was a unique sort of connection with actually, the coaches being ex-players. If you take a look, you might not realize it, but they got a group of coaches that I think they played almost 80 years in the league. You're talking about a head coach, Dan Campbell, that was in the league for, 10 years, I believe. Then on the offensive side of the ball, you got Mark Brunell as the quarterback coach. You have Hank Fraley as the offensive line coach. You got Deuce Staley, ex-Eagle is the running back coach, and Antoine Randall, who was almost in the league for 10 years. And then on the defensive side, you got Aaron Glenn, who's defensive coordinator. I think played almost 15 years in the league. And then Kelvin Shepard is the linebacker coach. So this staff is really heavy on, there's guys that won Super Bowl rings, the guys have been in Pro Bowls, So I think that's one thing you might see a little bit more, more than just the head coach is, hey, you know what, the staff is very heavy on, a lot of experience, like I said, whether it's in, playoff games, Super Bowls like Randall, Deuce was a very, very good running back, and, Fraley was a very good center, so that might be something to look forward to. It's like, hey, the staff is a little bit unique in that way.
Have any of the players stood out? I know Jamal Williams is basically like a fly to a camera. They're all attracting to him, and Amon-Ra St. Brown with his father being Mr. Universe and all that, and speaking a bunch of languages. Any of those guys stick out?
Yeah, no, I mean, we do like Jamal. I mean, Jamal's probably, going to be a good character. Obviously, although Williams, Jameson Williams, the 2 first-round picks, probably we'll focus on definitely 2, I mean, although Williams will probably be on, the injured sort of watch list because he's still coming, off the ACL injury, so, but Hutchinson will be a big thing. I mean, obviously Jared Goff, who's been on Hard Knocks before, this might be his 3rd year, but he's always been, very polite with us. So, obviously being the starting quarterback. So, but you never know. This is what makes Hard Knocks good. We don't know what the storylines will be. We don't know what the position battles will be. We don't know. Hey, maybe someone we didn't think of is now a really good character. Is a funny guy that's playing really well or something. I mean, like last year, we thought Micah Parsons could be a good character, but he just lit up the room, and obviously he was going to be a great player, and so you never know what might pop up throughout this type of process.
Take us through the process of editing and making the new episodes every week, because basically as soon as you get all that content, you gotta start making it for the next week. I feel like it's just every day. It's
Sure.
Long nights, long process.
Oh no, it is. It's usually 6 weeks. I mean, this is my 8th year on the show. It's a grind, but like I said, it's a very rewarding show to work on. So right now, if I got my numbers right, like there's 35 crew members in Detroit working, and that's like, 6 to 8 cameras on the field. And then we got, I think up to 20 robos in the building. And then there's another group of 35 producers and editors here, at Films, that goes through the footage every day and logs it and begins to edit it. And so I think for we shoot roughly 400 to 500, hours of footage, and the show is between 45 and 55 minutes, so on HBO. So, for the amount of footage we shoot, not as much gets on air, so we got to find the best stuff. So that's kind of the process. And like I said, it comes very quick, and things change all the time, like, who knows, like we're cruising into this and all of a sudden there's a major injury. I mean, the first year we did Hard Knocks was in 2000 with the Ravens, or 2001 with the Ravens. They had just won the Super Bowl in 2000. Well, the first big storyline of that show was Jamal Lewis blowing his knee out. Like they had just won the Super Bowl. They're going to go to repeat. They got all of these stars, that's coming, and then all of a sudden Jamal Lewis goes down, and then all of a sudden we got to redo this whole first show, because here's the biggest story of the first week or so, and it's this injury. So you never know, not that I want to see an injury, but you never know, whether it's somebody holds out, or somebody, happens, or, or somebody, gets promoted and stuff, or something like that. So you never know. But that's sort of the process, like I said, the amount of people that work on it and the amount of hours that we shoot.
We're talking with Chris Willis, lead archivist at NFL Films. So are there any rules when it comes to what can be aired and what can't? Because is it just anything that you shoot, or is it things that maybe could be a little bit more private to teams as well that you gotta cut out?
Well, no, the team always has a little bit of a say. Like, we're not just going to put whatever out there, but like I said, the Ravens Hard Knocks was 2001. So we've been doing this almost 20 plus years. So we kind of know, what we're looking for, what we need, what are the stories, what can we ask for, and what we get. So we're not going to go overboard with trying to, show something that we shouldn't be, or be somewhere where we shouldn't be, so we understand that, because we've been doing it for a long time. And so that's the process we take.
What do you think of all your years on working on Hard Knocks? Which one has been your favorite season?
Okay, I actually thought a little bit about that when I was saying, okay, this is season 8 for me. It's very tough because I like everything that we do, but I also go back to my very first year. Let me say, I think it was 2015. I thought the Hard Knocks with the Houston Texans was one of my favorite, pretty much like one of my all-time favorites, not just because I worked on it my first year, but I just thought, I thought the characters, the stories, the footage we got, the wires, I thought that was sort of JJ Watt's breaking out party, to get him on a national level. I've always thought Bill O'Brien was a really good coach. I liked what he brought. And so that season, for me, was, like I said, was one of my favorites of just characters, the footage we got, the wires we got, and the access we got, of putting it all together. So.
My favorite part about that was when Vince Wilfork came in with those overalls in the locker room. Everyone was Bob the Builder and all that. And then when they had the women's soccer player come in as well to kick the field goals, sure. I remember those are the ones that stood out to me.
See, those are the type of, like I said, those are the type of things that are visuals you remember that, like, oh wow, that made a great season. Yeah.
Final question for you, Chris. I want to go back a little bit to Steve Sabol and his legacy at NFL Films. And I believe he used to have a sign on his desk, something about like making you laugh. Like if I something about his goal every day is to make someone laugh or something. Is there a funny story or anything like that stood out with you and Steve, making you laugh like that?
Yeah, I mean, Steve, like I said, like I mentioned a little bit before, like Steve was just so down to earth. Like he was just, a normal guy. Like, he's, like I said, here's a president. You could say, he's famous. Like you said, put himself on TV and, with our shows and he promotes the sport and everybody knew who he was, the coaches, the owners. But I think for the most part, he was just a down to earth, normal guy that, like I said, and if you're a sports fan, especially, that you love football, like you have an instant connection with him. Like, like even if you came into the building and you would bump into each other, if you loved football and you had a football story, like he was willing to listen. Okay. You got a football story or you want to tell your favorite game, your favorite player or your moment with your dad. Like, so I think that's the thing with Steve. Steve just enjoyed talking about the game, interacting with people. And like I said, and a lot of that was, showing a little bit of humor, obviously, even with our football follies, our films like that really wasn't as well received when it first started. I remember a story that Steve talked about. George House, I think, was a little upset. It's like, we can't be showing, plays that, players doing fumbles and bumbling and falling down. And Steve, and especially Steve, was like, no, people will enjoy it. It's not going to make, people will actually want to watch it more because of it. And so he had that sense of humor that can make you, like I said, especially within, making movies and football, to sort of, get you to laugh at something. It might, might be so much serious or whatever. So
it's great memories and you learn from the best, Chris. Steve Sabol, of course, one of the pioneers in football films, that is for sure. Chris Willis, lead archivist at NFL Films, written 8 books about pro football history, won a couple Emmys as well for some of his work on Hard Knocks, among others. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, no, thanks for having me. It was awesome. Thanks, Noah. Appreciate it.
And what a great interview with Chris Willis here on Open Mic Night. Really happy that he was able to spend some time out of his busy schedule. I know he's producing, training camp just started this week for the Lions. They're getting a lot of footage for the first episode, which airs August 9th on HBO. Really, really excited for that. And, I've talked about it before. I am more excited about Hard Knocks than anyone out there because this team, I've been wanting for years for this Lions team to get some national attention, for people to know what we're building. For people to be aware of what Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes are trying to create. There is no more SOL. There's no more same old Lions. This team is trying to create a new identity. And I'm not saying it's the end all be all to get all this exposure and you're going to win all of a sudden, but I'm saying it helps. It helps to clear the negative image. And I think this series, at least how it's being perceived, is going to be a series that can really help, alleviate those stigmas that have been on the Lions in the past. So, really, really good stuff from there. Also got a little history lesson from Chris Willis as well, talking about Dutch Clark. And he's a real forgotten hero for the Lions in the 1930s. In fact, little known fact, he was the football coach and athletic director at University of Detroit back in the late 40s, early 50s. So that was kind of like his last hurrah in football before he retired from the sport for good. But a little fun fact there, he was at the University of Detroit, and the Lions used to play at University of Detroit Stadium. Now it's just a turf field that lacrosse and soccer play at over there at University. But that's where they played before they got into Briggs Stadium, Tiger Stadium, old Tiger Stadium. So really, really good stuff there. And of course from Steve Sabol, legendary himself. And I really fell in love with the NFL by watching NFL Films productions. I fell in love with A Football Life, NFL Top 10, just so interactive shows that Chris has helped, be a part of in his years at NFL Films that really helped my love, especially as a young kid. And so really that's what inspired me to apply for the Hall of Fame and to really learn about the football history because of these interactive ways to really engage. And Steve Sabol and all of them were on the cutting edge of that. So that was really, really awesome that he was able to take the time for that as well. All right, before we close out, I do want to mention real quick, and I mention it every year, Rocket Mortgage Classic is this week in Detroit at the Detroit Golf Club. 2 years ago, I was able to golf the course a week before they had the tournament there, and it was awesome. Pristine conditions. The rough was thick. I expect the rough to be thick this year again because they try to make it a little bit harder on these guys every year because the winning score in its first year was Nate Lashley, 28 under. So that's a ridiculous score, especially for PGA. So every year they try to thicken the rough, I think, a little bit more and try to make it harder. But, unfortunately, I will not be able to go. I'll be here in Canton, but I'll definitely be watching as much as I can because I think the Rocket Mortgage Classic is a great event for the city of Detroit. And, something that golf is growing in Michigan. Golf is more popular in Michigan than I think a lot of people in the nation realize. So I think especially since Oakland Hills burned down now, and it's probably going to be a while until they host an event, they took away the Buick Open at Warwick Hills in Flint and Grand Blanc. So having a PGA event back for now, this is the fourth year for Rocket Mortgage Classic has been really, really good. And I said it last year too, it's going to take a little bit of time to get the field, to where I think the tournament professional or the tournament executives and all that want it to be. But, this year, some of the big names are not playing it, like Phil Mickelson, Bryson DeChambeau, who's overseas playing in the Live Tour, both of them. There's other guys like Matthew Wolff, Bubba Watson. Those guys aren't playing like they used to. However, there are some big names that kind of replace them in the lineup. Some of the big names, Patrick Cantlay, Cameron Champ's a new name. Cam Davis, he was the winner last year. Remember, it was the playoff hole. I think there was 3 playoff holes that they had. Jason Day, Luke Donald. I know those guys are kind of past their prime, but still. Tony Finau's another guy. Ricky Fowler's always going to play in it because he's sponsored by Rocket Mortgage. Dylan Fratelli, the South African. Max Homa, he's starting to become a big name, really popular in golf as well. He's a guy that's new to this. He's another guy that, like I said, even though some of the big names like Phil Mickelson and company are not playing in this, slide those guys right in. Mackenzie Hughes, another guy from Canada who's a top 100 golfer. Zach Johnson, Masters winner. Kevin Kisner, Davis Love III. I know he's a senior now, but at least you kind of have a little bit of some of the senior names in it as well. Adam Scott, Webb Simpson, Gary Woodland. He plays in it every year. And Will Zalatoris, of course, his time is going to come in a major. He's been so close these last couple rounds, at the different majors, U.S. Open and Masters and all that. But, another guy, just slide him right in. So was it as, star-studded of a field as the executives wanted? Probably not, but at least there's some young guys that have interest in going in this. Zalatoris and Max Homa and Cameron Champ are really the guys that I think really headline that. Now, when it comes to the course, like I said, I've played it before. It is long, very long course. It favors the long hitter. And, that's why Bryson DeChambeau won it 2 years ago, long hitter. But I think this year, Cameron Champ's one of the longest hitters on tour. Let's go with Cameron Champ. Why not? Yeah, I'm calling it. Cameron Champ is going to win the Rocket Mortgage Classic this year because of his long hitting. It favors the long hitter. There's only water on one hole. I think it's the 15th because that's the 3-1-3 hole where you eagle hole in one on the par 3 and then birdie on the par 4, 3-1-3. I think that's 14, 15, 16. So I think I'm calling it. Cameron Champ's going to win the Rocket Mortgage this year. So, like I said, wish I was watching. or wish I could be there like I go every year, but we'll be in Canton. But I'll be definitely watching because I love when golf comes to Detroit once a year. It's always a fun time, and really appreciate it being in the city of Detroit. It was University of Detroit Jesuit, my high school's home course as well, just a couple blocks away from the high school. So I went there for prom and stuff a couple times as well. So it was always fun there. That's for sure. Make sure to follow all the other great content on the podcast network. The Doc and Jock podcast, always a classic, ramping up with their Lions coverage as well. The Fan Report. I know there's some Pistons news with summer league. Jaden Ivey's injury update and all that. Also the wrestling podcast. I heard they have a new creative director, by the way. The WWE. Vince McMahon's out as creative director, or he fired someone. I can't remember what it was, but I'm sure Adam and John have all the coverage on that. If you're a wrestling fan. And all the other great podcast content as well. And don't forget about John Macroon's fantastic coverage that he does with Sports Illustrated, covering all things Detroit Lions related as we begin training camp in a new national spotlight that this team has not seen in a very long time in Hard Knocks coming up on August 9th. Thank you again, folks, for tuning in. And make sure to tune in next week only on Open Mic Night.